Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our interactive webinar entitled Introduction to Sustainability Reporting. This session is organized by Petreltech Singapore, and we are delighted to have participants joining us from various locations. We truly appreciate you taking the time to be here today. Before we begin, here are a few quick reminders to help us run the session smoothly. First, this session will be recorded for reference and learning purposes. Second, feel free to use raise hand emoji for questions, or please type them in the MS Teams chat box and we'll address them during the Q&A segment. And lastly, your active participation during the session is highly encouraged. Now, I pass on to Madam Hamsi, our training development head, to welcome our speaker.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I would like to start this session with a quote. Sustainability is not a choice, it is a responsibility. So with that, I would like to share a few words about Mr. Parthiban Naidu, our presenter on today's topic. He is a sustainability practitioner with more than 30 years experience from Chevron, BP, and Cargill. And he was last the global vice president of Cargill for environmental health and safety that included sustainability implementation. And he brings a wealth of experience for people, well-being, environmental sustainability, and business profitability. Mr. Pati, thank you for your time and joining us to share your knowledge and practical insights in this area. The stage is all yours. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Hamsi, Madam, and Kenna for the introductions and the ground rules. So everyone, welcome to the ESG section for Petreltech. I'm going to present on behalf of Petreltech. My name is Parthy Naidu. So what I'm hoping over the next 45 minutes or an hour is I'm going to be giving you a good idea of what ESG is, because we have such a diverse group of people joining us all the way from Nigeria into our regions especially. So I'm going to give a fundamentals of some basics of ESG, and then I'm going to get into the reporting part. That's what I plan to do. So during the course of my presentation, I will try to pause to give you time to ask questions. So like Kenna said, please put up your hand, or if you want to just get on the call and just speak, then I'll try to take your question at that point. Feel free to interrupt anytime. If you feel uncomfortable, put it into the chat box, or if you feel more comfortable doing that, please do so. And David, my associate from Petreltech, will be there to look out for it, and I'll also make sure that your questions get addressed. Okay. And as Hamsi Madam said very rightly, she said, I'm a practitioner in ESG, right? Practitioner. There's a difference between a practitioner and an expert. I don't know whether anybody can call themselves an expert today in such an evolving field of ESG. So practitioner is what I call myself. My experience, as Hamsi Madam mentioned, I worked for oil majors Chevron and BP primarily, and then I worked for Cargill, a food and agriculture company, a total of more than 30 years. And in my time with the oil majors, Chevron and BP, I was a mid-senior executive. So I got to do work in the what we now call sustainability or ESG, used to be called in Chevron and BP CSR, corporate social responsibility, corporate and social responsibility. That's what we used to call it. But in many ways, quite similar, except for the climate change environmental part was not so well addressed in CSR. Of course, coming from an environment, health, and safety perspective, environment was right in the center of what we did in my team and myself. So I've got some understanding of environment from my Chevron and my BP days. What I really did in ESG or sustainability was in my Cargill time, which was over the last 4 years of my full-time working time. What I did in Cargill as the head of EHS, Environment, Health, Safety, there was no sustainability head at that time. So when I was in Cargill, inadvertently, it fell on my lap to take care of the implementation of sustainability programs, things like 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, working with the operations team, trying to encourage them, helping them understand what that meant, how can they do the operations in a more efficient manner. So in that sense, I was involved very much in the implementation of ESG for Cargill, for a number of years before they found a chief sustainability officer. And then just about that time, I too left my full-time employment. And the last 3 years, I've been doing my own business, a lot working with Mr. Chandra, who's on the call today, the owner of Petreltech. He's been a good friend and a very supportive person that I've worked with on ESG programs with him, Dr. David, and the team with Petreltech. Okay, so with that introduction, let me start with the presentation slides. First, I'm going to show you what you signed up for. So let me share. I'll show you the brochure that was used where you signed up. Hannah, can you let me know when you can see my slide or my LinkedIn?
It's visible, sir.
It's visible. Okay. So you see on the left, that's the introduction to sustainability reporting. What you signed up for was to understand why sustainability reporting is important and why it matters and what are some of the global frameworks. I'm going to cover this. But before I cover this, what I thought I will do is start with some fundamentals of ESG. Let me go to my... Okay. All right. I've got about 10 slides or so, not so many. So I'm going to speak to some of my experiences of what the information is in the slides. So I will not be reading from the slides. So starting with some fundamentals of ESG, just to make sure everybody starts off in the same platform, right, of ESG. Environment, social, and governance. Environmental responsibility, social responsibility, and what does governance look like? Let me give you an example of what does environmental responsibility that I've experienced. When I worked for BP, I was the regional asset manager. I had a number of facilities that I was responsible for where BP did oil trading. They brought in oil, they blended different products or they refined different products, and then they distributed around the world. So there were 14 facilities that I was responsible for. One of the facilities I will talk about. The one facility was in East Kalimantan, Indonesia. So what happened there was we had a partner in a coal mining company. Of course, I'm not going to name names. It was a rather large coal mining company in East Kalimantan, Indonesia. What was happening to them was they had many equipment. And if you understand coal mining, they use a lot of open pit mines where they use this gigantic tractors and diggers, equipment that require diesel supply. These are huge equipments, right? Because they're like transformers. They will go there and they will use explosive to break up and open up a pit. And then they'll use the equipment to go in and dig up all the earth to extract coal. So this equipment required diesel. And they approached BP and said, BP Trading, can you provide us diesel at a cost-effective price and in an efficient supply mode? And as the asset manager for the region, the job came to us. So what we decided to do was build a small distribution terminal in the middle of the coal mine in the forest. Because coal mines are like sporadically spread around the region. And this coal mine concession is many times Singapore, right? And Singapore is not big. The land area is many times Singapore. That's how big the coal mine concession is. So we built a fuel distribution terminal in the forest. So imagine, when you are building a terminal in the middle of the forest, first you need to clear the land. All the vegetation, the flora, the fauna, the animals are getting impacted. Plus, because this is a coal mine, there are a lot of villages or people that work in the coal mine that reside in those places. And they are going to get impacted when we bring in our equipment, and we need to also engage them to make sure they don't get upset over what we are trying to do. So on the environmental side, environmental responsibility for BP meant that when we do the clearing, we have to make sure that the flora and the fauna were not unnecessarily damaged and disturbed. And very importantly, in East Kalimantan, one of the unique tourism features was having orangutans. Orangutans are those large size, we can't call them monkeys, they're almost like apes. That are large size and very unique to Indonesia. They're called orangutans, and they resided in that habitat. So we had to engage specialists to relocate the orangutans, and the flora and fauna disturbance was minimized. That is biodiversity responsibility that undertook to make sure there was minimal disruption to the natural habitat of the orangutans as well as the flora and the fauna. That's an example of environmental responsibility that BP undertook when they constructed the small facility. When we did that, we also engaged the villagers to make sure they understood what we were trying to do and what was it in it for them, right? Because they are working for the coal mines. Some of them got brothers, sisters, families are there. And we had to give some form of incentive for them to feel welcome, to make us feel welcome, that they don't feel we are intruding into their space. So we gave them security jobs, some basic housekeeping work. We tried to engage them with campaigns to explain how are we going to do the job. It's an 18-month project. That kind of engagement is what we call social responsibility of connecting with the community and the people. So environmental responsibility is the biodiversity space of relocating the orangutans and the flora, fauna, minimal impact. On the people side is engaging the communities to make sure they feel not too disturbed and they feel like they can welcome us and it's a benefit for them as well. That is what social responsibility looks like. So with environmental social responsibility done on the governance side, because BP was building this for this coal concession, we set up a joint venture. And a joint venture company needs to be managed by a board of directors. So I got involved as the asset manager in the board. We had a business person from BP involved as a board, 2 board members. And then on their side, they had their CFO, who was the board chairman. She was a lady. And also they had 2 other people, one operations and one more, I can't remember what role he was in at that time. So 5 of us formed the board to make sure we managed the board issues. Many of them were ethical issues because there was people movement that we needed to bring contractors in. We needed to get the permits in place. So there were a lot of ethical issues that we needed to manage to make sure the project ran on schedule and we finished it on time and delivered, so that the supply chain was optimized for the coal mine. They got cost-effective diesel. At the same time, they had a nice flow of diesel coming to the equipment without disruption to the business. Okay. So environmental responsibility on the biodiversity side is what I explained as a real case. Social responsibility, the engagement of the community, people who lived in that habitat. And then governance is what you do at the board level in terms of ethics, compliance, and the diversity we had with their group of people, the 3 of them, and us bringing in international knowledge of how we can do this better. Okay, that should give you some sense of a real application of what ESG is like. I'm going to pause for a moment. Anybody got any questions at this point before I move?
Before BP jumps into social ESG kind of thing, social governance,
yes,
the government, local government itself would have given some direction to BPA. You should not bother the people or like that, or environmental, all those things.
That's a very good question, Ashok. What was required in Indonesia was we needed to prepare an environmental impact assessment, Ashok. It is one of their legal requirements that before we get the license to build, we needed to submit an environmental impact assessment. What that is there are certain features of environmental and social aspects that we needed to identify the impact it's going to have on the people and the habitats, and then what actions we are going to take to mitigate it. One of the actions was recognizing orangutans, the apes, were actually a tourism draw for them. And because they were in that habitat, without disturbing them, how can we do is relocate them to another place. That was the mitigation. On the people side, that they may get disturbed by the noise and the dust when we do the clearing and the removal of stuff, we said we're going to employ them and keep them engaged and keep them informed with campaigns, having luncheons. Luncheons means like a meal section with them, and explain to them what we are going to do beforehand. Those were the mitigations. So we had an environmental impact assessment table prepared, and we submitted to the authorities to say, this is what we will do. And I'm proud to say that BP was responsible enough to keep to that mitigation actions. So the project was successful in how it progressed. But I'll later give you an example where it was not too successful from the EIA aspect. But good question, Ashok. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to go into the next slide, which speaks to a little bit more on environmental, social, and governance. More than what I just talked about, biodiversity, community engagement, and governance. on the licensing and ethics part. There are other aspects of ESG that you may be aware of, or good for you all to know. The first on environmental would be climate change. What is happening with the climate? You may have heard that a number of years ago, actually 2015, the United Nations came together to determine based on scientific evidence. And scientific evidence is not all scientists agreeing. The majority of the scientists agreed that the world is becoming warmer. The temperature is going up. Majority of the scientists agreed on it. So in 2015, the world came together with different countries at the United Nations, and they said that based on the statistics, we should not go beyond 2-degree increase in temperature. 2 degrees from when? 2 degrees from pre-industrial time. Pre-industrial is late 1900s, I think the early 20th century, when you had horse carts and people were doing things more in a specialized manner. You had blacksmiths and horse carts and stuff. From that time, we have evolved with mass production. We came up with automobiles. We came up with factories that did mass production. Agriculture became expanded tremendously. So that period, we call it pre-industrial revolution. From that point to where we are, we should not exceed 2 degrees Celsius. That was the determination made by the United Nations. But what happened is from that period, early 1900s, pre-industrial period, to where we were 10 years ago, our temperatures has increased close to 1.2 degrees, a temperature increase. What we began to realize is some parts of the world were heating up more than that 1.2 degrees. Other parts of the world, not as much, but we were starting to get more hurricanes, weather events. General temperature was starting to go up in many places. So with the 1.2 degrees, is it a concern? Not so much, because the UN target was let's not exceed 2 degrees. And they said latest by, okay, let's not exceed 2 degrees was the criteria. But from 10 years ago, when they realized it was about 1.2 degree increase already, now 10 years down the road, we are approaching 1.5. Within 10 years, we are moving from 1.2 to approaching 1.5. That is a 0.3 degree increase. That is over a period of 10 years. So imagine by the end of this century, which is about 70 years away, if we continue at this pace without making a difference, the 0.3, you multiply by 7, it's almost 2 degree increase. From 1.5, you are likely to hit 3 degrees very easily. At least more than 2.5, if not 3. The 2 degrees goes forgotten. And the effects of that are pretty detrimental, according to the scientists. What is the effect? One, the temperature increase is going to make it difficult for us to live in places where the temperatures are going to get even hotter, especially in Asia, where we live in the equatorial belt. Because of the temperature increase, the icebergs in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere are likely to melt, and that's going to increase the sea level. Singapore recognizes that risk. They are talking about building levees at their low-lying areas because they don't want the water to flood into the island. They're talking about building levees, they're building drainages, they're spending millions of dollars, if not billions, on setting up adapting, not mitigating. Mitigating is about reducing. We can do what we can with the emissions and trying to reduce the temperature increase, but we are a small country, a small island. What we are learning to do is adaptation. We're going to build levees so we can keep the water out when the levels go up. But imagine what happens to the Philippines and the Indonesian islands, which are very low-lying islands, the Fiji Islands. A number of them are suffering, if not going to suffer even more. And the flooding is going to come inland, and people are going to push more towards the city areas. If not, the agricultural land and what used to be forest land is going to get flooded. That is the projection of a scenario that they're talking about with climate change. That is the biggest issue in the environmental space, which can only be mitigated by reducing carbon emission. The way cars are driving, the many cars on the road that are emitting carbon, the power generation that is going on, those are the things we are trying to work on to reduce it. So the top 3 things that affect climate change today are, one is power generation and large-scale manufacturing. how much electricity we use. Let's try to reduce and optimize. Let's try to do renewables. The second area is transportation, including planes, which are one of the most potent emissions of carbon. Land transportation is massive. Going into electric cars is going to help. The third is agricultural processes, trying to minimize agricultural release of carbon when you till the soil. Those are things they're looking at how to reduce. Okay, so climate change is a big part of environmental, the emissions of carbon. And of course, when you emit carbon, the carbon has to be absorbed back is the thinking. How do you absorb back? Photosynthesis, plants, trees, natural forests, resource utilization. Try to reduce the forest impact. Don't cut down the trees. Try to have more of that to absorb. That is the thinking behind environmental. In the social space, other than what I mentioned about community engagement, there are labor practices issues. Where do you get your jeans and Levi's and the different brands from? Many of them come from third world countries where the impact of people working under very poor labor practices is a concern. So there are other issues in social. In governance, as I mentioned, is ethical issues, the kind of issues we were experiencing in Indonesia. Okay. So when you hear these terms, ESG, CSR, and sustainability, as I mentioned, the original thought behind doing all this was called CSR, not necessarily in the environmental space, but more in the social space with people supporting communities and all that. They used to call it CSR, voluntary social good initiatives. What that has evolved since 10 years ago, when the UN came into place and looked at the climate change and said, we need to do something. Climate change issues handled by organizations or companies is very challenging. And my sense is they came up with this terminology, ESG, environment, social governance, because climate falls under E, but they can also do some in the S and the G as part of CSR. And they came with data-driven programs that will work on the E, S, and G. So CSR has evolved into ESG for organizations. But the broader term you can use is sustainability. Sustainability is what we are talking about. In the company language, it is called ESG. Why ESG matters today? Because of the regulatory pressures. Okay, regulatory pressures is a big part of it. In Singapore, we have the green plan that has been put together to try to reduce. As a small island, we don't make too much of an impact globally, but we are starting the ball rolling by doing what we can to reduce our carbon emission, in addition to adapting to it. Global markets, the European Union market is also very particular about ESG. They are being very responsible. So there are drivers in the EU. And if you want to compete as a global player, EU plays a big part. So global market competitiveness is heading towards a more environmentally friendly. I want to be careful caveating this because working for BP, I've seen BP go from an oil drilling company to a renewable focused company, back to oil drilling, to renewable focus in my time. And then now they've all gone back to oil drilling because the money is in oil drilling. Okay, I'll leave it at that for BP. Investors' behaviors may change. I'm not sure how much it is changing. When you buy stocks, for example, do you look for environmentally friendly stocks? Do you buy products that are environmentally friendly? Because it's going to cost you normally a little bit more. Are we willing to do that? I'm not sure that. But overall reputational impact. If a company doesn't do well in the environmental space, there's a possibility of reputational impact. So it's a risk management issue, right? I'm not going to do this slide on why sustainability reporting. Okay, that's all I had on the fundamentals of ESG. The fundamentals of ESG before I get into sustainability reporting. Any questions on the fundamentals of ESG? Any question pops into your mind? Okay, if not, I'll give you one more thought before I move on to reporting. There are two terms being played around. One is called net zero. The other term is called carbon neutrality. In many people's mind, those two terms are pretty interchangeable. They are not. In net zero, what we are talking about is if an organization releases carbon into atmosphere, let me take my oil and gas companies, my Chevrons, right? What they do is they drill oil. When they drill, whether on shore or in the waters, what comes out is oil, water, and gas. What they did with the gas, they used to flare it away, right? They will flare the gas. So that was creating, other than the oil coming out and you burn in a power plant and that generates more carbon, the flare out natural gas also creates carbon in the atmosphere, which heats up the atmosphere, right? Creating the hotter weather. So when this carbon comes out, how are you going to remove the carbon you take out? Because net zero refers to if you put 100 units of carbon into the atmosphere, you need to remove 100 units of carbon. So what the oil companies came up with is something called carbon capture. They want to capture the air with the carbon and then extract the carbon into carbon dioxide, liquefy it, and use it for pumping it back into the ground. That's what they try to do. But the amount of infrastructure you need for carbon capture is humongous. They are nowhere near taking out the 100 units with 100 units of capture. They are nowhere near. So what you end up doing is, in order to go to net zero, you have to resort to forests like what you have in the Amazon, or people who are planting trees, or doing good stuff in the environmental space that we can actually say, okay, we'll pay you for upkeeping this or doing this program where you have photosynthesis going on as an example. We'll pay you for it and use your activity as credit, offset credits. So if I'm putting out 100 units of carbon into the atmosphere, I'm going to buy or spend money to take what you do as carbon captures, and then I'm going to use it to offset and try to get to net zero. Well, that is not net zero. Actually, that is called carbon neutrality. You're actually buying offsets to cater for what carbon you're putting out into the air. When you buy offsets, that's called neutrality. When it is done in that sense, it's neutrality. It is not net zero. What is net zero is what you put out, you capture, or you reduce what you put out. You try to reduce it as much as possible. And then the last part, you have no choice because many companies will not be able to totally remove what they put out there. Then they probably have to resort to some offsets, a little bit of offsets. That is fine. That is approaching net zero. So we have to be careful because I worked with a client who was a logistics company. And when I got to understand how they were calculating their net zero, they were actually doing carbon neutrality. They were trying to do carbon neutrality. They were not doing net zero. So many companies get deceived by using the term net zero. So something for you all to watch out. Kana, how am I doing on time?
2 minutes left for 6 p.m., sir.
Okay. I'm going to do another 10, 15 minutes, and then I will take full question section from you. Okay. So let's come to sustainability reporting. So in sustainability reporting, let me start with the Singapore sustainability reporting. What is the requirement? Well, Singapore Stock Exchange has decided that all public listed companies in the Singapore Stock Exchange should have a sustainability report submitted every year as part of their financial report together with sustainability report. So for that, the requirement they had was the sustainability report has to have a TCFD framework around it. TCFD stands for Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. It is very linked to financial reporting. It has got 4 elements of strategy, governance, risk and opportunities, and measures and targets, right? 4 components. It looks at it and says, based on climate change taking on carbon emissions that you're doing, how is that affecting your financial position? So that had to be the framework that we had to use. In addition, you can use other frameworks. So what I and my associate David has been doing is we have been using GRI framework together with TCFD to do reporting for the companies that we have worked with. That's what we have been doing. But what is changing in the Singapore Stock Exchange is there's a realization there's a better framework that can be used, which is called the IFRS, International Financial, let me just make sure I get that right, International Financial Reporting Standard. That is the new framework they've come up with, which was issued by ISSB, another another organization. And from 2025, this year onwards, from TCFD reporting, they have gone to IFRS. TCFD is related to what IFRS looks like, but IFRS has got a little bit of a slant of a difference. Okay, I'm not going to go into so much into IFRS, but please be aware it has to be reported under the IFRS framework for 2025. Submission is due in 2026 after financial year for the company within 4 to 5 months, depending on whether you are doing external auditing or not. External assurance, is it being conducted? If there's external assurance conducted, they give you 5 months after closure of financial year. If there's no, then they give you only 4 months before which you must report, you must submit. So if your financial year ends in December, you need to submit by April. That is the latest. And today, the Singapore requirement is to submit for only Scope 1 and Scope 2 report. Scope 1 is carbon emissions that you are doing out of your own activity. For example, in oil and gas facilities, we typically have generators running. We don't use municipal power. So when we have generator running, we have to use diesel. That is our own generation of diesel burns, which sends carbon into the atmosphere. That has got to be calculated. We have fugitive emissions. We have a lot of valves and piping and flanges. A lot of leakage is happening, and that emits into the atmosphere. So those have to be reported under Scope 1. Scope 2 is if you were to use electricity, that is somebody else is burning the fuel in order to produce electricity. Based on the kilowattage, you can actually calculate how much emission has happened as a result of that burn to produce the electricity. So Scope 1, Scope 2 is in play. So in Singapore, from TCFD and other standards, now we are moving to IFRS reporting. In the EU, we have the CSRD. CSRD stands for Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It is a directive under which they have the European Sustainability Reporting Standards that are being used. They are not very dissimilar from what we are doing, but there are a couple of differences between what the Singapore requirement are and what theirs is. One of the main differences is in Singapore, we do materiality assessment of what is important for an organization. And then based on that, we do reporting. For the European Union, they want to do double materiality. They want to do what the company does, what kind of environmental impact the company has on its financial statement, as well as what impact the company activities have on the environment and the social aspects of it. So there's a double version of materiality that needs to be taken into account for European reporting. And they are more extensive in how they are doing that. Okay. What are the challenges that we have experienced? And I'm sure Dr. David, if I let him speak, he's going to give you a lot of challenges because he was helping me do reporting a number of times. One of the challenges is lack of standardization. The frameworks that we have available, whether it's TCFD, GRI, or other frameworks, they're all different. So when you want to do comparison of one previous report to what we are doing, it's very difficult to compare. So when we took over one of the company's reporting, we realized that the previous work done was very difficult to have continuity. We couldn't use that framework because things have changed and we couldn't follow, right? We have difficulty. So standardization of framework is important. So Singapore taking the new stance of IFRS, I think will help. Data collection complexity. Organization giving reliable data. I'll give you a good example. This company we're working with, they were trying to provide us, they were a subsea company, subsea oil and gas company. The data they provided us was very agarism. I'm using a local term. Agarism means estimates. They were giving us bunker fuel usage, there were estimates. So when they came to us and we looked at it and we said, hey, this doesn't sound right because I've got some marine experience and looking at it, how can every ship be about the same? Different ships travel different distances, different utilization rate, how can it be about the same? So when I questioned, they said, oh, we're giving you some estimates. No, that doesn't work. If you need accurate data, which needs to be what's in your log when the ship uses for 1 month, for every month, for the rest of the year, how much they're using needs to be accurately collected. And sometimes it's difficult because they have different locations. Ships are logging their bunker fuel in different areas. They don't have nice proper databases to use that. So one of the things Petreltech provides is a nice database platform that you can use to collect data. So after we go through one round collecting the data and going through the pains of it, We set up a nice system for you so that automatically you can have the data collected, and eventually one of your ESG champions can take over and run it. So Petreltech does a value-added service of sorting out your issues so that you have a streamlined system for ESG reporting. Greenwashing, I don't even explain about this. You know, what standards they use when somebody says, oh, my food is healthy. Well, in Singapore, we have the pyramid that we use to sort of compare. Anytime you see a pyramid, the food is healthy food. And then now with sugar, we have the ABCDs. If it is A, it's good. If it is D, it is not. So we have some degree of greenwashing management, but around the world, it is not that easy. A lot of greenwashing is going on. Inconsistent stakeholder expectations is just like BP. They went from renewables to drilling for oil, back to renewables to drilling for oil. A lot of it is stakeholder driven. The shareholders, what they want, what their other stakeholders are wanting. Those are driving the ESG reporting. And they are the challenges that we face in ESG reporting. Okay, these are the different standards. The ones that we have used mostly have been GRI, TCFD. We are moving into IFRS, but you can see there are other ISO standards which are used. Most of you would be aware with, and I know Petreltech does a lot of work in the ISO space for clients. They have the other standards as well. You can look at this at your own. SASB is one of the more common ones. Some information on the EU sustainability regulations. As I said, compared to what we are used to in Asia, European Union has got very more stringent regulations, and that is driving ESG reporting a lot more. Sometimes I think the EU is doing a good job of protecting the planet and the people that work there. I've been involved in a couple of retrenchment exercises, especially in the Cargill time. You know, anytime at a senior executive level, when we look at where we're going to reduce manpower, one of the biggest challenges is European Union, people in the European Union. Because they're under so much regulatory controls, a company can't just reduce people like that. In the rest of the world, Singapore especially, not a problem. You can actually terminate anybody and then say, this is a retrenchment, take the package and thank you so much. European Union, you can't do that because they're so regulated that the companies aren't able to do if they want to continue business. Singapore Exchange reporting, what I mentioned, 2026, all reports for 2025 data reported in 2026 is going to be the IFRS, which brings me to one of my last two slides, I think. This gives a flavor of how we do ESG reporting in Petreltech. Okay, I'm not going to go through every one, but let me give you the framework of how we go about ESG reporting. Initially, when we approach a company, we will start with understanding what are their business goals. Okay, having understood their business goals, and sometimes companies don't have very clear business goals. Having understood their business goals, we try to align the business goals to the sustainability programs you're going to come with. So at the back of our minds, know, like, if it's an oil and gas subsea company, the business goal is to try to get more business from other oil majors. They are a small subsea company. They want to get more business from other oil majors. What would actually be a business goal alignment to the programs that we're going to implement, right? So that is something we start off with, understanding the business. The second thing we do is we start determining what are material issues for the company. How we determine materiality, there's so many things that you can look at. Well, the Singapore Stock Exchange has got a core set of metrics that they've provided in their website. The core metrics speaks to environmental, social, and governance issues. And they're very specific. In environmental, it talks about greenhouse gases, energy conservation, water savings, waste management. In social, it talks about diversity. It talks about age-related diversity. It talks about training, development of people. It talks about health and safety and a number of other things. In governance, it talks about ethics and compliance, independency of directors. It talks about certifications that you have in place. It talks about assurance that you want to provide to your sustainability reporting. So we take those things as starters, and then we put a group of stakeholders together, company personnel at different levels of the organization, senior level, middle level, lower levels. And then we try to get some regulator input. We try to get some customer input. We sit them around and look at these measures and we say, what are critical for you? What is important as a stakeholder? What is important for your company? And then that's how we determine materiality. And then we try to bring the business goals together with the materiality, and try to determine what programs will be value adding for this organization in terms of their achievement of profitability and sustainability, at the same time the impact it has on the environment and social aspects. So we try to do that. And then once we identify the programs, we put some baseline determination of that. We try to see over 1 year or 3-year period, we try to draw some baselines and put some measures and targets to show what can you do to show improvement and improve in your E, S, and G space. That's what we do. And we finish it off with an offering of assurance by a third-party auditor. It can be a limited assurance or it can be a more full-fledged assurance. That is the service we provide in identifying the goal, determining materiality, aligning based on the materiality and the goals, ESG programs, and then putting nice measures and targets into place and helping them draw a baseline and how you can move forward. That is the kind of value-add service that we provide. And then we have it checked by a third party that we can offer somebody else outside our company who can do the assurance before you submit it to the authorities. So we are true to our word that we will give you a clean, authentic report. End of the day, how the organization wants to handle is up to them. But as far as Petreltech is concerned, our value says that we are here for the true reason of sustainability. We want to see the world being protected, people well-being being protected, at the same time, businesses remaining profitable. That's why the alignment of ESG to what the organizational goals are is very important for us. I think I just summarized my last statement with making clear that we are here for well-being of people, for environmental, the planet's protection, and also for businesses remaining profitable. So we are always looking for ways that are win-win situations for companies. That's our starting point to convince management that this is good value, it's good business, let's do this ESG reporting properly. And then there will come a period when you need to have some cost attached to it. We have that conversation with the organization whether they're going to get there. Because I do know businesses sometimes are very challenged. So depending on what is their profit margins, then they will decide whether they want to get into that space. With that, I finished my presentation on reporting. Any questions or comments from anybody?
Mr. Bhate, this is Ram here. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, please. Who is this?
This is Ramakrishnan. Hi.
Oh, I am Ramakrishnan.
Yeah. No, okay. Mr. Bhate, this has been excellently framed and a very insightful view. I'm sure that your collective 30 years of experience has helped us. At least I'm a kind of a novice in this particular area.
Okay.
So when I saw this, I'm a banker, right? And quite interested in the fields like this to kind of understand, because we do measure the risk in a bank from a credit risk, from a market risk, from an operational risk. And the new risk, which is essentially encountering everybody, is the climate risk. Because bankers also add, in terms of the lending, a portion of a risk which essentially emanates or germinates from what you articulated in terms of while you do the drilling, you get basically the carbon outside. So to that extent, if I need to do the drilling, I need financing, and financing is provided banks. And to that extent, there is also a social responsibility, which is essentially inculcated in banks' practices as well. So to that extent, I think I try to connect the dot. So, but my fundamental question, Mr. Pathu, is that I think you made a very valid statement that having been associated with BP, everybody's intent is driven on the basis of their shareholders' interest. You start with drill and then you go to ESG and then go to BP drill again. Now, don't you think that it's a kind of a political willingness which needs to be there? Because as you rightly articulate, that EU is something kind of not only aggressive, they seem to be having a measured approach with a very tightened process. But when you see from a larger design, US still last year was part of that COP22, then they exited. Now they wanted to go back to fossil fuel. Now, where do you draw the line? Because by 2100, if the degrees is actually going to go by 3%, where none of us are going to be alive at that point in time, that's a different thing, right? Yeah. But aren't we basically leaving the universe in a very bad shape? And does it mean that it needs to be kind of somewhere bred within the political willingness? Because everything starts there, right?
Yeah.
Because So that was my first point in terms of where do you see the political willingness, and do you really see that seriousness which is essentially coming up across all the stakeholders? That's one. And second one, as you rightly say, measuring this particular capital climate risk is not that easy, right? Because one is neutrality, second is which is in the form of an offset, second is your net zero. So if I were a lender and if I say I give 1 billion loan to BP, right? Now I get charged by my say regulator, which is MAS, that since you're extending a financial kind of an assistance to an entity which is involved in generating the climate carbon, you would also need to maintain or allocate capital as you had articulated in one of your slides.
Mhm.
How do you essentially try to also measure that capital risk so that climate risk such that when an entity in a bank is able to kind of measure its various risks, it is essentially able to kind of as or rather measure a portion of climate risk. This is something which was always running in my mind because it's not tangible, right? I do give a billion loan to say BP.
Yeah.
BP can technically use that funds either to do a drill,
Yeah.
or they can use an other alternate mechanism. Is
Yeah.
it based on an end use opportunity, which we need to kind of keep tracking? So
Yeah.
these were largely the 2 points up. But thank you. It's a fantastic session.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ramakrishnan, for the question. So I'll try and take the second one first. Let's say we give a bank were to give $1 billion to BP. My question would be, I haven't worked in banks before in my life, so I'm a bit of I'm not my expertise. But if a bank were to give or any contract were to be drawn up, there should be conditions of the contract. Just the way when we go to a country and we're going to set up that distribution terminal, our contract with the authorities for the license to build was the EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment. These are the risks, these are the impacts you're going to have on the habitats and also the people. And these are the mitigations we're going to put into place. You know what happens when we have that? The companies are supposed to do that. But the problem is sometimes they won't. Like you say, the $1 billion that you give, contractually agreed, this is what we're going to be doing. I hope there's a contract in place. But somebody needs to check from the bank to make sure that is done. Insurance companies do that all the time. When a project is insured, I know they send like people like Marsh and others who are there with expertise. They will come and check to make sure you say this is what you're going to construct. We gave you insurance coverage. Did you do that? What is your safety record? What are the issues you're having? So they'll come and check. So my thinking is a bank should have an arm, just like BP Trading had me as an asset manager who make sure the assets were in good shape. Bank should have a group of people who will do the ESG checking or the asset checking, whether the contract is being honored by the recipient of the loan. Does that make sense, sir?
Yeah, okay. I think that makes sense.
Okay, that was one. The other you mentioned about political willingness of the organization. BP is a fantastic company. I mean, Chevron and BP are very responsible, fantastic companies. But what happens is markets change. You know, the oil price has been fluctuating. So from making their $20 billion a year, they went to make $10 billion. You may say I'm being sarcastic, but imagine just because drop in profits, but it's a blue, it's very well profitable business, just lesser than what they used to pay. Shareholder interest changes. So one of the things, I mean, I've been at the C-suite level for Cargill. In BP Chevron, I was not. One of the things I do when I engage an SME, small, medium-sized company for ESG reporting is I always speak to the CEO and engage the leadership team as early as possible to get a sense of where their mind is politically. Is this a real thing they want to do? Or is this a facade that they want to fix? You know, we have ESG reporting, good and fine, thank you so much. Then I know where to pitch it. As a consultant going into a business, I can't too much influence. But what I do is I run workshops with the people at the working level, helping them appreciate as an individual what you can do. As a person in the organization, what you can do. Do it meaningfully. Because we are all one day going where, you know, sir, we are all finishing off, right? Our lives are going to end one day. What are you going to leave behind? If it is $1 billion, so be it. But also think about the well-being of the planet and the people that you're working with and see what you can make a difference with. So my usual approach is understand where the leadership is. Quite often, I can't sway them given the short period of time I have. But when I have workshops, I make it hands-on. I get them done well enough so that people have actually an awareness. This is something I can do as an individual or a person in the company.
Understood.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Thank
good.
you.
Thanks.
Bharti
Thank
sir,
you.
we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
I'll read out the question. It's from Jean. From your estimate, how many degrees in the global temperature may be decreased from the current and future greening and sustainability carbon footprints, lowering the efforts?
Yeah. So Gene, right? Yeah, Gene. So Gene, I've limited exposure. I only do what I do now over the last 3 years, meeting different clients, different exposures, and sensing where they are. Chevron BP was very clear. Their main objective was oil drilling, right? The money is in the oil. They're totally focused on it. I'll give you one simple example, Gene, before I answer your question properly. I was in Bangladesh for Chevron for an operational excellence audit. And when I went there, they were explaining to me about CSR. At that time was corporate social responsibility, right? They were spending 0.1% of the revenues in Bangladesh. 0.1%. That's a few $100,000. In Bangladeshi terms, that's really good because they were buying sewing machines, they were giving small loans. A lot of women were starting to work. Fantastic. But it is 0.1% of their revenue. So oil companies, while they do a very minute, negligible portion. That is what's happening in the world today. When you see the US backing off from the UN resolution, major countries are trying to do some doing, some not. We are all over the place. What we really need, and coming from the safety environment, I call them the trigger events. You need a trigger event before the world comes together. COVID was one such trigger event when we came together and we built the vaccine within record time, right? We can do it if we want to. In the environmental space, there's proof that we can do it because when the ozone layer was getting holes, remember, with all the aerosols, we managed to reverse that with getting away from aerosol and the gases that were emitting from all our canisters. We moved away from it and we managed to close up the ozone layer. So we can do this. But today, the way we are so dispersed in our thinking and the world leaders being so far apart in how they're approaching sustainability, it does not appear that we'll keep within the 2-degree request that was made by the United Nations by the end of this century. That's why I mentioned 70 years from now, about 70 years from now. Are we going to keep within the 2 degrees, which is the target? Unlikely. We seem to be going past 2 degrees based on what we are doing today. I hope that answers your question, G.
Gerald want to add.
Yeah, we have a question from Gerald, sir.
Please go ahead, Gerald.
I am Gerald.
Gerald.
Actually, my company is a MNC company. We are based in Singapore, but our head office is in Europe. So, but we are not submitting any ESG report to SGX, but our head office is enforcing us to monthly basis to collect the ESG data and submitting to SGX. Can you give some insight on light on that, how we can proceed and chip into that and help us to complete that?
So when Europe wants the reporting to be done, it is not only for companies that operate within Europe also. If it is a global company, by virtue you have an office in Europe, the requirement will be global reporting needs to go in there. So whatever the requirements are, like double materiality requirements, there are a couple of very key requirements in Europe. I wrote them down here, a couple of key requirements. I know double materiality is one of them. Sorry, I can't read my own handwriting sometimes. So a couple of key requirements which will differentiate from what happens in the rest of the world, but they are more stringent requirements. Yes, you have to oblige and provide the data, so it's brought together. When I was in Cargill, that's what we did with our EHS team. Cargill is a US company, so they had to do their reporting in the US, but they had global reporting, maybe not as stringent as the Europe. So what we did was we had templates sent out to the various countries and the regions by business unit actually, and then they will collect the data. My ESG team, my EHS team will work on behalf of corporate ESG to try to pull the data from operations, collate it nicely, and send it back to the head office. And then the head office will put the final touches together. That's how it was working, Gerald.
So if your Europe it doesn't apply for SGX, right? Because SGX is different, that Europe is different. So we need to give some guideline from the governance or something from the government.
Unless your Singapore company is public listed in Singapore, is it? Or is it just a branch of European company?
No, it's public listed.
Oh, it is public listed in Singapore. Then you need to meet both requirements. You need to submit for the SGX requirement, as well as submit data, which probably is more stringent data, back to your European counterparts for them to collect.
Okay, understood.
So double reporting you'll have in that case.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks for the clarification.
Parthy sir, with your permission, we have initiated to create a group on Sustainability Hub, and this sustainability awareness trainings will continue on every month on a specific date. So we encourage everyone to please join in the Telegram group if you insist to do so, so that you will get more insights, and you may also get more number of informations in that. And today's presentation also will be shared in this one. So this is just the QR for joining the Telegram group. So we'll also post the QR in the chat also, and the Telegram channel also in the chat. And we also have two sectors wherein we also give AI training and sustainability reporting. So in alternate weeks. So next week we also have our AI intelligence on business, how humans collaborate over replacements of business. And this is the registration for these things. So these two things will be shared in the sustainability Telegram channel, as well as in the current chat as well.